Goals, a self-limiting proposition. I, this is actually an old model, though I've been tinkering with a new approach to storytelling using Kumu and Insight Maker and different things woven together so that this is actually a video about this particular model and the approach that is being used to present it, and I'd like your feedback on both the model itself and the way that it's put together. So that when you actually go to the the model itself, which is in Kumu, there's a description of the model, and the idea behind this particular model is that goals, setting goals and striving to achieve them is a self-limiting proposition because the the activity is directed based upon the difference between the what the goal is and what the current state is, and the gap creates is the difference between them, and that's the basis for activity, and the activity moves the current state in the direction of the gap. Now notice that the causal loop diagram is unfolded here in Kumu, and on a loop by loop basis, so that the first loop is presented in a description and then option to click resource limits, so that then there's it presents another piece of the model where I talk about the fact that, well, while the gap is the impetus for activity, activity isn't actually generally for free. It's usually dependent upon some amount of resources from somewhere, so that the amount of activity that actually results from the gap is based upon the resources available to pursue that activity. So it's a limiting aspect of it, and and as one gets closer and closer to the goal, you typically get to a situation where there are excess resources. There are resources available that are not being used because the amount of resources, or the gap that remains and the activity required, is less than what is capable of being performed by the resources available. And typically, you've heard the comment about activity expands to fill the time available. Well, the activity also declines to fill the space or the time available, just because they don't know what else that they're going to do. And once you get to this point of the model, you can click here on goal seeking structure, and it will show you a simulation or a stock and flow version of that particular model, so that you get a sense of, here is the balancing loop that initiates the activity, and it presents the implications of those relationships, and talks about it, so that, with this set up in a rather stupid fashion, actually, the activity is only dependent upon the gap and everything, because nothing is slowing it down. Everything gets done in the first time frame. Though if we introduce the resource constraints, it in fact now takes time because of the level of resources that are available. There are only so much activity that can be completed in a particular time step, so that the activity progresses in a linear fashion until it gets to a point where the activity remaining is less than resources available that I talked about, but it's not evident at this point. So in the next version of this, it actually displays the excess capacity that's available that's not being utilized somewhere. So that the whole idea is that basing progress or progress based upon goals. What do you do once you get to the goal? And it's sort of, that's why I say that it's self-limiting. So I get to this point, and individuals can actually interact with the model and run the simulation on their own, or simply close this and go back to the Kumu model. And if they click in the background, you get back to the beginning, and you can walk through the alternative structure, which is a reinforcing structure based upon a reference state, so that progress is activity is dependent upon progress, and it's simply reinforcing, and there's simply a reference state, so that rather than than measuring progress toward a goal. You're measuring progress from a reference state forward, and it's a reinforcing structure, and it doesn't have the limitations of the goal-seeking balancing loop initially, though it still does have to contend with the idea of a resource limit so that the activity contends with resources, so the current state moves forward based upon the resources available. And the question is, to how long does it in fact do that? Is there a concept of enough so that as you progress sufficiently far from the reference state, is there a sense that you have progressed enough and activity begins to decline because there is a concept of enough? And to overcome that, what would be appropriate would be to reposition the reference state based upon the current state at some future point in time, so that you're constantly readjusting the reference state and moving forward based upon where the reference state is. And then from here you can also click and look at the simulation model version of the reinforcing structure, whereby the growth of this situation is in the first version only dependent upon the difference between the current state and the reference state. So activity is dependent upon progress, which is a little unrealistic, as I said before, because there are resource requirements. So if we introduce resources, you notice that this is the resource limit, so that progress or activity continues until the resource limit is reached, and then the progress becomes linear but still growing quite rapidly. Then if we introduce the concept of enough, so that it, after some period of time, the resources begin to say, well, you know, we've progressed far enough from the reference state so that this is enough. Activity begins to decline, and therefore the current state isn't progressing as rapidly as it was. And to deal with this situation, as I said, we could periodically readjust the reference state to be the current state, so that it develops a new curve from that point on. And one can close this graph and then interact with the simulation model and change the variables and rerun. Well, you need to open this and then rerun the simulation, and you can do that a number of times. And once you're finished, you can simply close this, go back here, go back to the beginning, and if you'd like, you can leave comments on this particular model in Kumu itself. And if you don't have a Kumu account and you're not logged in, there'll be a button here that you can click to sign up for a Kumu account, which is free, and you can leave comments. And I'll also, for this particular one, I've included a video about goals, a self-limiting proposition. And you're probably asking, how is it that I managed to get a video in a video that I'm making? And it's a trick I learned from watching Spaceballs. So leave me some thoughts and let me know what you think of this approach for describing models and integrating descriptions and simulation models and various and sundry things. And so take care, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye.